Hello students, good morning. In the previous class we discussed about Hicks price effect, substitution effect and breaking of price effect into income effect and substitution effect. Okay, these were the things we discussed last time. We also discussed about how to derive the demand curve from the price effect. Today we shall discuss about the Slutsky substitution effect. Okay, I told you in the first class that both Hicks as well as Slutsky, they gave their views about the substitution effect. So we discussed about the Hicks earlier. Now we will go to discuss about Slutsky's substitution effect. Now the concept of substitution effect, the way good X is substituted for good Y or good Y is substituted for good X, remains constant in both the cases. They are same. In case of Hicks, we expressed it in terms of the single indifference curve, but here in case of Slutsky, due to fall in price or due to rise in price, to show the substitution effect, we can use two indifference curves. So Slutsky says the same thing as Hicks said, but the difference is that Slutsky showed his substitution effect through a separate indifference curve. Okay, so now let us go to discuss how Slutsky has shown this substitution effect in case of a fall in price and also in case of a rise in price. So for fall in price, we call it as compensating variation, but for rise in price, we call it as equivalent variation. Okay, so first let us talk of a fall in price. So Slutsky's substitution effect, fall in price. Now how, due to a fall in price of let's say good X, the consumer substitutes X for Y, so that we have to show through a diagram. Let's see here. Let's say this is good X, this is good Y, good X, this is good Y. The price of good X initially was shown in price line PL. Now when the price falls of good X, what happens? The price line shifts to the right PL1. So when price falls, the consumer is better off. The consumer now can go to a higher indifference curve. But our objective is that not to allow him to go to the higher indifference curve, but to restrict him to stay in the same indifference curve as Hicks said. How this is to be done? Now, the real income which increases due to a fall in price, that much of income is to be withdrawn, is to be taken out from the consumer, so that he will be forced to stay in the same indifference curve. That is the Hicks version. Let's say how Slutsky explains it. Let's say price falls, so the consumer is better off, his real income rises. Now, in order to keep him in the same indifference curve, what we do? We draw a new income line parallel to PL1. Let's say the income line is PL, it is drawn parallel to PL1, so that we reduce income up to this is PL, so let's make it AB because both names will be confusing. So the income line AB is drawn parallel to PL1, so that we reduce income up to PA, so that the consumer will be forced to stay in the same indifference curve. Now initially, when there was no fall in price, the consumer was equilibrium in IC1. was equilibrium in IC1, and at this point, let's say point E, where he consumed this much of X, let's say OM of X and ON of Y, right? He was equilibrium here. But due to a fall in price, what happens? Even if you reduce his income to the same extent as there was fall in price, still the consumer now finds good X to be cheaper than good Y. So naturally he will substitute Y for X, and therefore he will consume more of X and less of Y. So he will not be equilibrium now at point E. According to Slutsky, he will be equilibrium with a new indifference curve he shows in IC2. That is, he will be not equilibrium at point E. He will come to E1 in IC2. Remember, IC1 and IC2 remains in the same income line. That means his income line AB is constant, and IC1 and IC2 both remain in the same indifference curve. Both gives him equal satisfaction. But we have given him indifference curve number 2. Why, I will tell you. Now here the consumer is in a position to consume more of X and less of Y. Let's say he consumes ON1 of Y and OM1 of X. So Slutsky has drawn a new indifference curve to clearly show what is the substitution effect. At this point, before the fall in price, he was at E. Now remember, when your income is reduced to the same amount of fall in price, naturally you will be forced to stay in the same indifference curve, but you will not be forced to stay with the same combination of goods, because you find good X to be cheaper now. Because so combination E and combination E1 both are not same. They are two different combinations. At E1, the consumer is better off because he finds good X to be cheaper, so he consumes more of X and less of Y. He substitutes Y to have more of X. Therefore, at this point E1, the consumer will be equilibrium. So his movement from E to E1, we can say this is substitution effect in case of Slutsky. So Slutsky clearly shows that because there is a fall in price, the consumer will be forced to stay in the same income line, but still his combinations will be different. So this individual, he moves to point E1, not point E. Why E1? Now because E1 is a better combination for him, because here he finds good X to be cheaper, so he will purchase more of good X and less of good Y. So E1 is always preferable. So his movement, after his income is reduced, his movement from E to E1, we call it as substitution effect, which Hicks never showed. Hicks showed both the points E and E1 in the same indifference curve. Okay, but here he showed it in two different indifference curves, showing clearly that point E1 giving the consumer better satisfaction than E. So this is a case of fall in price. We can now go to explain in case of a rise in price. Draw it in the same way. Let's say price was PL. This is good X. This is good Y. When price rises, I have told you already, the price line will rotate leftwards. So a new price line PL1 is drawn, which shows price has increased. So the price line shifts to the left. Now what happens if price rises? The consumer is worse off. He can consume less quantity. Now our objective is not to allow him to come to a lower indifference curve. We want that he should stay in the same indifference curve. So what we will do? We will add some income to his income stream so that he will be forced to stay in the same indifference curve as he was previously. This we call as equivalent variation. The amount of price rise, whatever is the amount of price rise, equal amount of income we have added to his income stream, so that he will be forced to stay in the same indifference curve. Previously, suppose this is a new income line we have drawn, let's say AB. Previously, the consumer was equilibrium at this point. We can draw it like this. Let's say IC1. So with a fall in price, he will be forced to, with a rise in price, he will be forced to come to a lower indifference curve. But our objective is not to allow him to come to the lower indifference curve. So we have increased his income up to PA. Here we reduced the income, but here we added the income. We gave some extra income to the consumer so that he will not be forced, he will not be worse off. He will be equilibrium in the same new income line. So we draw a new income line AB parallel to PL1. So at this point E, he was previously equilibrium. Now after he gets some extra income, what happens? Will he be equilibrium at this point? As Hicks said. Slutsky says no, because good X price has increased, so he will now substitute good X for good Y. So now what he will do? He will have a new indifference curve here. Let's say he will come to IC2, which lies on the same income line as IC1. You can see here, IC1 lies in the same income line AB as IC2. So IC1 and IC2 both cost him equal. Both gives him same degree of cost. But in terms of satisfaction, IC2 is more satisfying than IC1. The reason being, now good X has become costlier. Good X has become dearer. So what he will do? Previously he was consuming at E, but when good X has become costlier, he will try to consume less of good X and more of good Y. So previously his combination was here like this. Let's say he consumed OM of X and ON of Y. Now with a rise in price of good X, he will shift from E to E1, where he will consume very less of X. Let's say OM1 of X and ON of 1 of Y. So you see here, he consumes this much amount of extra Y and this much amount of X he reduces, and this much amount of Y he adds. So because of a rise in price from PL to PL1, the consumer should be worse off. But in order to keep him in the same level of consumption, what we do? We add some income to his income stream so that a new income line AB is drawn parallel to PL1. So previously he was equilibrium at point E, but now he will not be equilibrium at point E. He will shift to point E1, because E1 and E remains in the same income line, which costs same to the consumer. But what he does? Why does he come to point E1? Now because good X has become costlier, so he no more wants to purchase more of X. He wants to consume less of X and more of Y. So he will substitute X for Y. So therefore he will shift to point E1 on IC2, and where he will consume less of X and more of Y. So Slutsky in his analysis, he has shown this change of substitution effect through two indifference curves, which Hicks showed in only one indifference curve. So his movement from E to E1, we can call it as substitution effect. Okay, here also E to E1 is substitution effect, here also E to E1 is substitution effect. So here Slutsky clearly, very beautifully explains through diagram how a consumer substitute one good for the other when the price of the good falls or rises. Okay. So this is all about Slutsky's substitution effect. तो मैंने सब मो वीडियो देखुन बोधे 3 दिन कि 4 दिन तले गोटे वीडियो अपलोड करथिली आज देखुली ओनली 7 to 8 views. I don't know the reason why, whether you don't know or you have forgotten me or you don't know that I am taking class in YouTube. Please tell your friends to look for the videos and to read here, because I am using whiteboard, I am using a marker pen for your betterment. है Google Meet क्लास नौनी एथ केवल जे ब्लैकबोर्ड यूज करें व्हाइट बोर्ड यूज करें. ओके नेक्स्ट टाइम आसले आम अन्न गोटे किसी पढ़ा. नेक्स्ट कौन अच्छी डिमांड फंक्शन आसो पढ़ा. थैंक यू.